This meeting is being recorded.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Patchin. I'm a behavior analyst who works for the Pilgrim Area Collaborative, and I'm contracted to work at a variety of settings, including Grow Associates. I provide consultation to adult day programs under the Positive Behavior Support Initiative. And I also spend the rest of my time working with students who are transition age. So I do transition assessments. I've been doing that for about 3 years now. And also part of Pilgrim Area Collaborative, we have a Learning for Life department where we provide transition and community access services. So that could be direct services to a teenager or more of a coaching model to a young adult. And I supervise several of those as well as I coach myself. So I have a special interest in transition. And one thing that I have learned through my experience is that the steps for the transition can be confusing, and every school district's a little bit different. So today we're really just going to talk about the steps that all families should ensure that their school and themselves are following. And then at the end, there's some additional resources that I think are very helpful for families. So here we go. So transition, we know, is the passage from youth to adulthood, and it's really an important time for students who are being supported on IEPs in schools. And so we're shifting from entitlement from special education services at school to eligibility in the adult service world. And that is a big shift. And it took me a while to actually really understand that as well, because when we are in school or our loved one is in school, we are supported on an IEP and we advocate for all of those supports and services that the team believes they need. When you move into the adult world, it is an eligibility, and a lot does have to do with funding and services and access to those things. So although there are still the similar supports and services once you get to the adult world, if you're not entitled to those. So that's just a big difference that families sometimes have a difficult time understanding. And even myself, I have to remember that as well when I'm advocating for additional supports for someone. It's unique to each person and each family. And so starting really early, I believe that schools will typically invite a student to attend their IEP at about 15. It's a really good idea. I know some students that's difficult for, so if you just start with some really small bits of information and including them along that process as early as possible, it is going to make the transition smoother, and you will have a better idea about what those next steps for your loved one is. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was age of majority. So we know that when a person turns 18, we should be thinking about and planning for how are we going to make decisions, because once they're 18, they will decide what's going to happen with their IEP, right? So up until 18, it's usually the parents. Sometimes we have some advocate or other family member that's helping us, but when the student turns 18, they're the ones who are going to be making those decisions, and they're going to give consent on whether they want to engage in the IEP services that are either current or being proposed by the team. So it's important for families to start having conversations about what that is going to look like prior to their loved one turning 18. Everyone's different with regards to decision making. Some students are really good about making decisions. Others have a lot of challenges around decision making, and families as well. So I think planning really early for that milestone, and when we're 18, how do we want to do this? So we'll let you take the lead, but hopefully there'll be some collaboration continued with your child or loved one. One important thing you'd want to do when they do turn 18 is go and get an ID. This is an important piece. It's also really signifies that I am an adult now, right? So I have some identification. I should be carrying a wallet. It's really important to have it if we're going to be traveling, opening a bank account, doing any type of banking, really. And school, you might need it. registering for things, entering buildings. So I think that having a mass ID, I know several young adults that don't, and that is something when we do like our coaching services, that's one of the things we'll go and do with a young adult, is that make sure that they have an official form of identification. Chapter 688. So most of you, I hope, have heard of the Massachusetts law, chapter 688. Some people call it the Turning 22 law, but this is a referral process. So it helps students who are being supported on an IEP to connect with the appropriate adult agency before they leave high school or their special education entitled services. I'm going to talk mainly a lot about the 688 today because it is an important piece, and I think that there's not a lot of information given about it. Some school districts are really good about it and others not so much. So I think it's important to know that the 688 is a referral and not your application for eligibility. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what is it? So chapter 688 is a way for families, agencies, schools to identify who will need continued services when they are an adult. So that is 22 and after. There are individuals who will qualify for adult services at 18. Typically, that's an individual with an ASD diagnosis with no intellectual disability. So those individuals can be referred to an adult agency at 18, but primarily it happens at 22. It's students who have been on an IEP, so they're entitled to that referral and needs to be filed with whatever agency the team determines is the lead agency. And it should be done at least 2 years before the student graduates, or if they're in school till 22, it would be 2 years before they turn 22. So some students will complete their high school credits and earn their diploma, and they'll be transitioning right, then into adult services. And so then you at junior year, beginning of junior year, you would want to make sure that a 688 referral had been filed. If your child would be staying on and doing additional transition services from 18 to 22, then it's 2 years before. So, but when they're 20 years old, you want to make sure that the referral has been sent. The school district will send it to the adult agency or the Bureau of Transitional Planning, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Based on what the IEP team thinks the agency would best meet their needs. So it's again, very specific to students' diagnosis. It's not the 688 is not your application. So schools submit that referral, but then the family is responsible for applying. So once the agency gets the referral, then the parent, they would get a letter saying that they have received the 688 referral. The family gets a letter, and then you have to apply. And then the agency would then determine whether the student will be eligible to receive adult services. I'm going to talk more about this because this is the piece that people get confused. Sometimes people feel that the 688 went through, we're all set. So a 688 got sent to DDS. So I think we're all set. You're not. That's really just about securing funding. So it's important that the family, so when you're in school and you have your special education entitlement, it's usually a pretty dynamic team with a lot of different professionals and many people that are involved. And hopefully families have been guided and provided good information as they're going. Once we start talking about transition, a lot is the responsibility of the family and understanding and following up on these things, because sometimes schools, they might really understand the school piece and the special education piece, but they might not be well versed in the adult service piece. So it is important for families to be educated so that you can kind of stay on top of it. And there is, I do have a slide on here that is for parents, like families, what do we need to be making sure of? So it's important that we explore all of the resources and continue to identify ongoing needs and and participate in future planning, continued discussions about the planning. And stop me at any point if any questions have come in, Jill. Who gets a 688 referral? So you must be on an IEP, need continued services because of the severity of your disability, and you're unable to work 20 or more hours per week in competitive employment. Why? So why do we do the referral? So the referral is important for two reasons. One, as I just mentioned, funding, right? So it's saying to adult agencies and really the state legislature to say, hey, this person's coming. So let's say I was 20 years old, I'm finishing up, I'm going to have 2 more years of my transition program. So we want to let the adult agencies and the state know, okay, Kara's coming through and we're going to need funding in 2 years. And that turning 22 budget is very different than someone who would be applying for DDS outside of that, if you or really any of the adult agencies. So it's really just an alert. It's a referral. It's saying, let's secure this, make sure we can secure some funding for this person. But then you're going to need to apply to make sure that that the person that you're applying for is eligible. The 688 referral also alerts agencies that work with a student to start completing an individualized transition plan. So that will help to plan the supports the students may need after they leave school. Part of the IEP is the transition planning form. So this is really very similar to a transition planning form, where now we're going to take all of that information and put it into a plan that is related to adult services. So what do parents need to do? So this is the checklist, and I think that this piece is really important. So I'm going to go slow here. We want to talk about the 688 referral early, thinking about which adult agency is going to be the right one to send it to. It's okay if a person has co-occurring diagnoses, there is the Bureau for Transition Services, and we'll talk about that. And they would determine which transition agency would be the best for your loved one, but it's really important to start talking about it and understand that piece. And then the school will print out, it's almost like a consent when you sign consent for testing, but this is a 688 referral and it needs to be signed by the parent before it gets submitted. So sometimes the school will think that they have done it. So let's say I'm working with a family and I ask the family, so has the 688 referral been completed? And the family's like, I think so. Because sometimes it should say actually on your transition planning form on the IEP, it should say the date in which the 688 referral will be sent or was sent. And sometimes there's a date there, but it actually hasn't been sent, or the school maybe printed it out, but it didn't go home, didn't get sent to the house, didn't get signed. So one thing, and I put it on, on down here, is making multiple copies of forms. Anything like that you sign is a good idea to take a photocopy. Actually, now you could snap a picture with your phone, but that's just a good idea. If you do sign the 688 referral, I have had families that have signed it and the school has sent it and then it has got lost somehow. I don't know how that happens, but we all know those things happen. So really keeping good track of any forms you're signing is important. And then learning about the different adult agencies. I will mention them tonight, and I'm going to talk specifically about 3 agencies, but I think learning about them so that you can understand what types of support and services are being provided by each agency is important. And it's also important for the student to understand that and why. Like, why would you receive services from Mass Rehab Commission? And then you want to make sure that once the referral has been sent home from school and you've signed it, you've sent it back to school, that the referral was received. And then you're going to reach out and contact that agency and just check in with the liaison at school to make sure. Because families should then, once you know it's been received, as I said, you should get a letter. I will say that sometimes these letters are nondescript, so they're general, and I've even seen ones where it would say like to the parent of Kara Patchin, but then when you open the letter, it really doesn't say specifically to the parent of Kara Patchin or anything like that. It's not really specific. So there's sometimes general letters and people miss them. but you should receive a letter to say, we've got the 688 referral. Your next step is to fill out the eligibility application. So you would fill that out. And then the agents, once that application, they're lengthy applications, once that application has been completed, the agency will then determine if if the student with disabilities would be eligible for services from their particular agency. Always make multiple copies of forms. I like to do the snap a photo and email it to myself. And then you want to, after filling out the application, follow up with the adult service agency in a few weeks to make sure that they have received that application. So here are a list of adult service agencies that a 688 referral could be sent to. So there's the Department of Developmental Disabilities. There's a Massachusetts Rehab Commission, Department of Mental Health, Massachusetts Commission for the Blind, and Massachusetts Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. So with these agencies, the primary goal of the 688 referral is to alert the adult transition agency. Okay, so we talked about to secure that funding. So if we're not able to decide, like if it were a student that, let's say, had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, maybe that was the primary diagnosis, their qualifying diagnosis for IEP, for their IEP, but then they had a secondary of health, ADHD, maybe anxiety, maybe mental health. So there's a couple of things happening, which is going to be the lead agency. The referral could be sent to the Bureau of Transition Planning, and then they would take a look at the IEP, and then they would select the agency that would best fit the student's need. Although the team is going to identify that one transitional agency for the student can receive services from multiple agencies once they start to plan, and then they start receiving adult services. So for example, if you were a person that, has the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis and your lead agency was DDS, but you had some mental health challenges or diagnoses, you could then also receive supports from the Department of Mental Health. And if you were getting some employment services, you could theoretically also receive services from Massachusetts Rehab Commission. So just because that you're tied to a lead agency initially, that's really just based on the primary diagnosis and need of the person, but the other agencies could be a part of your adult services. So DDS, I'll just tell you a little bit about the Department of Developmental Services. So that is for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and their supports are designed to promote meaningful participation and inclusion in all aspects of community life. Services are coordinated through the 4 regional offices, and then there's 23 area offices. They have contracts with different agencies, so like Grow Associates. And now there's also 2 self-directed service options, which Jill was just saying there's going to be a presenter at the open house about that, which would be really interesting. I'm going to go to that myself. Individuals can be determined eligible for adult services through DDS if they have significant limitations in adaptive functioning and are diagnosed with an intellectual disability or autism spectrum disorder. So in order to receive those adult services, the eligibility of application has to be completed, even if the person was receiving DDS services for that, like as a child. So people get confused on that too. So Department of Developmental Services provides services to children, but when you transition from child to the adult services, you are going to need to fill out another application for DDS. So that's really important. DMH is Department of Mental Health, and they are supplemental to your health insurance. So if you are receiving therapeutic services through your health insurance, that would continue, and then DMH would hopefully be able to provide additional supports. It could be offering of groups, things like that. They can sometimes DMH, you would still use your health insurance, but they can help to connect you with resources. And then the Massachusetts Rehab Commission helps people with disabilities live and work independently. So the vocational rehabilitation program can help with, looking for jobs for people that have various disabilities. And also MRC can help support around like pre-employment. So a lot of people do like the pre-ETS program. So kids like between 18 to 22 will often do pre-ETS. And then MRC can then continue to work with people over the course of their lifetime. They can have them for some time, and then maybe they don't need MRC, and then they can kind of reopen their relationship with MRC, for lack of a better word. I'm still learning a lot about MRC, but MRC is really about vocational support and job training and job support. So to finish up, these are some other community resources that I think are really important when people are starting to plan for their child's transition from their special education entitlement to adult services. Federation for Children with Special Needs is an excellent resource. Their website is amazing. They have a lot of transition workshops and a lot of great information. Getting connected with your DDS Family Support Center is a great idea for families. So as I was mentioning about the regional offices, so each region has different family support centers. So you could look up like what's the closest DDS Family Support Center to my town, and they'll connect you. I know like for people who live near Grow Associates, there is the Arc of Greater Brockton, and I believe Advocates is also on the other side. So for those surrounding towns, but they're a wonderful resource, and they can help with the process. They can help with those applications and all of that information that I just, very quickly threw out. The Massachusetts ARC is great. The NAMI Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Association for Mental Health is very helpful. AANE has some really cool offerings for families. SSI is important to know about. Independent Living Centers, Mass Hire is another great one for employment and vocation. There's autism support centers all over, so you could look for what's the closest autism support center near me. I know this South Shore Support Services is near me, and there's other support centers that you could Google. Insurance-based services for if you have a loved one with the ASD diagnosis. People sometimes forget that is the law and act related to insurance coverage for autism. And so you can access lots of different supports and services through your own medical insurance. And then Mass Health, it's a good idea to look into Mass Health for your loved one. It could be secondary Mass Health if you have commercial insurance. So I think we're just at just almost a half hour. Jill, did anybody have any questions or comments?
I'll check. I wanted to add that Grow works with, and our families do, also the Arc of the South Shore.
Oh, yes, Arc of the South Shore. They're great.
Yep. So we're kind of surrounded by ARCs.
Yes.
And no, I have no open questions. If you, any of our participants or attendees, if you have questions, do put them in the Q&A. Kara, do you have, well, this webinar will be available on Grow's website indefinitely. And Kara, do you have an email you'd like to share if people have questions?
Sure. If anybody wants to shoot me a message, of course. Oh, I should have put it in the front slide, but it's Patchin, Patchin @pilgrimac.org. And I'd be happy to answer any questions specific to your journey.
Yeah, because I bet you I'm going to wait a minute because it does take time to type out questions, and people may not want to get into their personal
their own personal. The best advice though that I can give is talking about it as early as possible. I mean, I think if you have a high schooler, there should be lots of conversations about what's the goal, because when we're looking at developing IEP goals and adding service delivery. We want to really be looking at what's the end goal. Is it employment? Okay, so then we want to make sure that we have all of those skills to be successful out, in the work world.
And it's always interesting too, because not always the parents' goals mesh with the loved one's goals.
That's very
So
true. Yes. Yeah.
that's an interesting
it's hard
dynamic.
that's so true, Jill. And it's really hard to know when you're a teen. So getting out there and exploring and seeing what other people are doing, particularly somebody that might have a similar profile, similar learning profile, or maybe some of the same challenges that you have, to be able to see what can happen. Because I know when I started working in the adult world about 7 years ago, I've been working with kids for many years, and I was like, what's the adult world like? It seems so scary, but it's actually quite exciting. And there's so many cool things now that people can do. It's just really getting out there and getting the ideas, and it's person-centered planning. So it really is all about what that person's strengths are and what their, desires are.
And Grow Associates has so many community outings. It's a common theme that the individuals that go to and volunteer at Cradles to Crayons and Salvation Army, they love helping other people. They don't necessarily have other jobs, but in a way, it has a lot of transferable employment skills. And so people dip their toes into different activities. And another person said to me that she's going to start looking for a job now. And I said, well, what changed? She said, I'm not shy anymore. And
that's great.
And I said, well, how did that happen? And she said, my friend here, just helped her, talked to her, and was her initial friend at Grow. And now she has other friends, and she's decided she's no longer shy. So it's really interesting to see people's journeys.
It is, and connecting with as many people as you can. That's why those family support centers are great, or even the Federation, because going to a workshop where you're meeting other families and going through it, then you can kind of see, oh, we're at the same place, or, oh, that's a really cool idea, that type of thing.
Okay, here's a question. My son got his GED, is now looking for work. We've applied for DDS, but really need help with work. Will DDS get us in contact with Mass Rehab Commission? Okay,
so anyone can refer to Mass Rehab Commission. So you can call for your son and connect him with Mass Rehab Commission. So at that point, he's not, there's not going to be a 688 referral. So I would reach out to MRC, and you can even go on, I think it's MRC Connect, and do the application right online. But that's MRC can be a self-referral. So you can that they should be able to do the application right there online, and then meet with somebody at their local MRC office.
Would Mass Hire be of assistance?
Mass Hire is a good resource, but I would first go through the MRC to see what they would be eligible for. So MRC, I believe, and like I just said, I'm learning too. I'm actually going with a coaching client myself. They will go based on your disability, and then they'll go based on your income to what you're eligible for once you are 22. So if her son just got his GED, I'm going to guess he's a little bit older. I'm not sure, but there are different. So there's pre-employment. If he's under 22, he might still qualify for some pre-employment services. If he's older than 22, there's different types of services, and the eligibility does have to do with their abilities and income. I think there might be other factors to that too. So.
And speaking of income, I encourage you to go to the Grow website and see our webinar on ABLE accounts, because they allow you, if you're individuals working, to save more income, is the bottom line of it.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think we're wrapped up. We
Awesome.
answered the one